The trade deadline has come and passed.
Ryan Poles extending more and giving him a big pay raise.
The Dodgers made the move. They got Jack Flaherty.
The Orioles picked up a couple of wins on deadline day on Tuesday.
Joining me now from The Athletic, Diana Orsini.
We're talking about the ACC possibly stealing teams from the Big 12.
The Locked On Podcast Network presents the Big 6 in 60. The 6 biggest national sports stories from the local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network. Get the real story, why it matters, what's next, who wins the big game, and more, all in 60 minutes. The Big 6 in 60 starts now with the biggest story in sports.
Ryan Poles extending more and giving him a big pay raise.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast.
The Chicago Bears could have guaranteed themselves the lowest price on DJ Moore by just letting him play out the last 2 years on his current contract. He is absolutely a steal this year and an even better deal next year with no real guaranteed money, a bunch of flexibility at the end of this contract so that if, heaven forbid, something went wrong, the Bears aren't locked into DJ Moore, or if Roman Uze or whatever in the future changes, like they could have just ridden out these next 2 years of Moore at a really affordable price for a wide receiver of his caliber and maybe spent that money at other positions. But they structured this new extension in a particularly interesting way. So if you look at the remainder of his current deal, you go to our friends at overthecap.com. DJ Moore do $16.05 million this year, $16.05 million next year, and only $1 million of this year's salary is guaranteed, and none of next year's salary is guaranteed. He's got a roster bonus that would kick in, but essentially almost no guaranteed money left on this contract. And obviously, if you're a player like DJ Moore, or any player in the NFL really, you want as much guaranteed money as possible because, again, the Bears could cut you and they don't have to pay you almost any of that $16 million. So he's got an incentive to want to make a deal that's going to get him more guaranteed money. And so the way the Bears worked this out with DJ Moore is interesting. So it's a 4-year, $110 million contract extension that adds 4 years on top of the 2 years that he's got already. But that 4-year 110 comes with, I want to say it was around 80 and change $1 million guaranteed, but it guarantees the remaining years on the contract still, and then adds more money on top of that. So by guaranteeing the $16 million over the next 2 years and adding, I'm sure they're going to add some money to those cap hits, you're not guaranteeing the later years of this contract extension. And so it's going to add on 4 years that are almost fully guaranteed, but when those 4 years, when the guarantees start is right now, instead of at the end of the current 2 years left on his current contract. So it's not like they're just taking 4 years at $110 million and just sticking that on the end of what is currently there, but they're kind of meshing it into what's left on the deal so that you're adding 4 years, but really only 2 of the added years are going to be fully guaranteed. A friend of the show, Brad Spielberger, who's a salary cap expert who, I guess he did leave Pro Football Focus. He's now the director of football administration for Grand Central Sports Management, but he did a great job of breaking this down on Twitter. Essentially, the next 2 years, DJ Moore was owed $32.1 million. You guarantee that money, and then they're adding $50.5 million in new guarantees on top of that. So only out of the 4 years they're adding to this contract, only $50 million across those 4 years is fully guaranteed. And so that essentially will guarantee the first new year and most of the salary of the second new season. But essentially, on this 4-year extension, the last 2 years are not going to be guaranteed, just like they are on his current contract. So essentially, it's kind of like you took the 2 years left on his current deal and moved those to the end and stuck 4 years where he is now, and with different salary numbers. But essentially, you're guaranteeing his salary this year, next year, and the 2 years after that. The next 4 years, his salary is going to be guaranteed, but then the 2 extra years are not guaranteed, just like his contract now has the last 2 years not guaranteed. With the extension, the last 2 years are not guaranteed. So they're absolutely locked into DJ Moore for the next 4 seasons, and that's great. But they're not locked into him for 6. He added 4 years to the current 2-year contract. They weren't really locked into him for these 2 years. So instead they said, hey, we're going to guarantee you this year. We're going to guarantee you next year. And we're going to add 2 more guaranteed years to that contract. And then the last 2 years after that will not be guaranteed, because the Bears are essentially saying, hey, you're 27 years old. We want to guarantee your money at age 27, at age 28, at age 29, and age 30. But for the 31 and 32 in this contract, we don't want to be locked in on guaranteeing you $27.5 million a year. Essentially, that's what the 410 divided by 4, $27.5 million a year is what's being added onto that. But some of that money, I think, is going to be added to this year and next year. I don't think his cap hit's going to stay exactly the same the next 2 years, and then you just add all the money on the end of that. Like, we'll see exactly how they space this out. We don't have the full contract numbers, but I think it's really smart for the Bears to essentially only add 2 guaranteed years onto this deal, because we knew DJ Moore wasn't going anywhere this year. We knew he wasn't going to go anywhere next year. So it's really only 2 more years that they're locking themselves into DJ Moore, while adding 4 total years to the contract. So they'll have the same flexibility they were enjoying now before this extension. They're going to get to enjoy again in 4 seasons after 4 years of DJ Moore's prime. And then at that point, DJ Moore will be entering, again, age 31, 32 seasons. And then they can decide then, much like they decided now to give him a big extension, they can have that second decision point later on, but not be locked into him for those slightly past your prime ages, although he should still be a great receiver at 31 to 32. That's still younger than where Keenan Allen is right now. And all throughout this process, they lock in another one of Caleb Williams' weapons for the duration of Caleb Williams' rookie contract. Because now you've got DJ Moore under contract until 2029. Isn't that crazy? 2029, I think, will be the last year of his deal, because you're adding 4 more years onto a current contract that ends in 25, so that gets you to 29. Rome Odunze's rookie contract will have a 5th-year option in 2028. Cole Kmet's current extension takes him through 2027. Obviously, then Caleb Williams' 5th-year option would take you to 2028 as well. And even DeAndre Swift, when you talk about Bears weapons and how long they're under contract, you got 3 years of him through 2026. So at the very least, you've got your 2 top weapons locked in for the next 4 years, plus your tight end is locked in for the next 3 years, and a running back locked in for the next 2 years, not even including this year, I suppose. This core of weapons around Caleb Williams is set, and it's not going to be such a drastic hindrance to the Chicago Bears still signing players. This is what you were giving yourself salary cap flexibility for. This is what the Bears have been saving up for, is making sure that you got the quarterback and you've got weapons locked in for the quarterback that aren't going to go anywhere, that he can continue to grow with DJ Moore and form that really strong connection throughout the duration of his rookie contract. And then once you get towards the end of Caleb's rookie contract, you'll be at the end of DJ Moore's contract, at Rome Odunze's contract, Cole Kmet's contract. And then you can kind of figure, okay, where is the franchise? What other weapons have they acquired since then? Right? It's just nice to know that all of these young 27 and under players are locked in for the next 2 or 3 seasons. So your offensive pieces are not going anywhere.
No football, no NBA, no problem with FanDuel. We got baseball. WNBA is going to be back before you know it. The Olympics are here. Plenty to dive into over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. The MVP award in the American League may already be decided, and there's still 2 more months to play. FanDuel is giving you Aaron Judge or the field. The odds for Aaron Judge to win the AL MVP, -1,000. That's a lot. 10-1. The odds are anyone else at +660. All rise. So what are you waiting for? Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. If you're catching this episode after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode.
The Dodgers made the move. They got Jack Flaherty.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We've seen the Dodgers take it past the deadline before in terms of when we found out news, and they almost got to that point on Tuesday, but just before the deadline, we got the news that the Dodgers made the move for a starting pitcher, and they got the best starting pitcher traded at the deadline.
Yeah, we talked yesterday. Flaherty might have been third on our list of maybe even fourth if you talk about the unrealistic option of Blake Snell. But, Garrett Crochet, Tarek Skubal, obviously Skubal would have been number one. Crochet has the upside, but Flaherty, like you said, those other guys didn't get traded. Flaherty was absolutely up there on our list of the guys likely to be traded. He was there at the top of the list of who we wanted. And realistically, this was always going to come down to the last minute. When that there had been reports the Yankees and Red Sox were also in the bidding for Flaherty. Who knows? You never know if those reports are true. But the Tigers, it made sense for them to draw out the bidding until the last minute. The crazy thing was, after all drawing out that bidding, setting up a bidding war, all that stuff, what the Dodgers had to send to the Tigers to get Flaherty was remarkably less than I had feared.
Yeah, you look at Yusei Kikuchi to the Astros last night, and they sent out what was considered a haul by people that know prospects a lot better than we do. When you see what the Padres gave up for a rental and reliever in Tanner Scott earlier in the day, and they gave up 3 of their top 10 prospects, not top 10 in baseball, but of their top 10 prospects. And then you see the Dodgers, and they didn't give up. And they traded from depth with Tyron Liranzo, the catcher, getting traded, and then they traded a guy that they got for a reliever in the offseason in Trey Sweeney, who wasn't going to hit enough to really play shortstop for the Dodgers anyways. And if you can find a lot of glove first no hitting shortstops out there in the world. We've seen it this year with Nick Ahmed getting picked up off his couch a couple or last week. So yeah, for what it cost, for what other teams paid, it really does seem like, the Tigers either really, really, really like these guys, or maybe they felt like the old one, like after Eduardo Rodriguez kind of played the Dodgers last year. Maybe they're like, you know what, let's just get the deal done.
Yeah, and to be fair, there's a lot to like about Liranzo. I think Liranzo is a very good hitter. We don't know if he's going to be a catcher long-term or a first baseman, and that's a big difference when it comes to the defensive spectrum and overall value. If he's not a catcher, he's a power hitting first baseman. If he's a power hitting catcher, that's potential to be very valuable. But in the end, like we set ourselves up, we knew the Dodgers had to make some moves. They had holes they need to fill, and we knew it was going to be a seller's market because the playoff format has changed things, so there aren't as many selling teams. So we had kind of prepared ourselves. It's going to be painful. There's going to be names that we really like that leave the organization. And in the end, the 2 biggest names that left the organization were Miguel Vargas and Tyrone Liranzo, who, Vargas, we talked about him yesterday, didn't have a place on the Dodgers. Love Vargas, happy for him. No pain at all for him leaving the Dodgers. And Liranzo, down the line a couple of years, we may look back and say, oh, the Dodgers really could use Tyrone Liranzo right now. But at the moment, and forgetting the best pitcher who was traded, I couldn't believe it when Robert Murray tweeted that was the full trade. I was like, okay, Bert must be wrong. There must be more names trickling in. But nope, that was the whole trade.
It felt like they added an extra name the other day in Noah Miller in the other trade, and then it felt like maybe they were missing a name here. But you know what? The Dodgers got it done. They got the best pitcher traded at the deadline, and it was exciting in the moment. Like, it's one of those where the last couple of years we haven't quite had that excitement at the deadline, and maybe even a little bit jaded off the fact of losing to the Padres the year before that, and then losing to the Braves the year before that, and it just was a little bit different. But this was genuinely exciting. That the Dodgers can now you can bank on guys coming back, but you don't necessarily. You still need Mookie Betts and hopefully Max Muncy to come back for sure. But on the pitching side, like if Yamamoto doesn't make it back, you now have a capable guy there to slot in number 2, and then you see what else kind of goes out the rest of the way in terms of who pitches any other postseason games. But you have that locked in. You got the arm. You give yourself a little bit of breathing room in the sense of the rotation. You give yourself a little bit of breathing room in the sense of the bullpen with Michael Kopech, and then the Dodgers also picked up Kevin Kiermaier, which we'll talk about a little bit more in the next segment. But yeah, for For Jack Flaherty, last year he got traded at the deadline, didn't quite work out, but he was a little bit different pitcher last year. He did work on some stuff, and he's been really good. He doesn't walk a lot of guys. He does get a lot of strikeouts. That usually plays well in October. And then, to wrap it all up, he's from LA. Like he grew up in LA. He's from here, and his mom's already posted on Twitter a picture of him in Dodger gear from back in the day. So that's fun.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. We got it with Tyler Glasnow in the offseason, get to come home play for his hometown team. Same for Flaherty here. Maybe same for Max Fried in the offseason. We'll see. But it's coming into today, we knew the Dodgers needed to add a starting pitcher. We would have loved for them to also add Brent Rooker, but in the end, not every trade deadline can be an A+. In fact, I don't know if there's such a thing as an A+ trade deadline. But this was about as close to an A as you can get, when you understand that there's some A's that are 94% and some A's that are 98%,
Yeah, exactly. So it was, being involved in like some other Dodger chats, it was one of those where, you wait till the end and kind of figure it out. And, everything else before that is just kind of, you're just killing time by maybe complaining a little bit. And
people were melting down. It was.
But the Dodgers got it done, and the Dodgers are a better team than they were a couple of days ago. And, it's one of those things where you look at every other team that's maybe going to compete with the Dodgers in the National League. The Phillies swapped out, and they got Austin Hayes to kind of platoon out there in the outfield, but they didn't necessarily get too much better. The Padres did pick up Tanner Scott. Their back of the bullpen does look pretty strong, but they did pick up Martin Perez, but the Padres still have been kind of inconsistent throughout this season. And so the Dodgers, but the Dodgers just had a better hot streak in between all that. And the Dodgers have a higher ceiling and a higher floor than the Padres do.
The Orioles picked up a couple of wins on deadline day on Tuesday.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It was pretty crazy. Now, the Orioles made their first move much earlier in the day, or their first move of the deadline, I should say. Obviously, they acquired Zach Eflin and Sir Anthony Dominguez on Friday ahead of the deadline. But their first deadline day move came earlier in the day, and they went and got Trevor Rogers, left-handed starter from the Marlins, sent Connor Norby and Kyle Stowers over to Miami in that deal. For a full breakdown of that trade, I did a live episode in the evening on Tuesday where I broke that trade down in full. So that would be the previous episode before this one in your feed. Make sure to go check that one out. I also live reacted on that show, though, to all the other moves that were pouring in. And that's what we're going to get to on this episode. A further look at all of those other moves that were pouring in on Tuesday. So let's start with the first one we got. This one came about 10 minutes before the 6 o'clock deadline on Tuesday and was fairly surprising because it was a right-handed hitting outfield bat, which we knew the Orioles were looking at. Now, they had gotten one in Christian Pache in the Dominguez for Hayes trade with the Phillies on Friday, but Pache not much of a hitter, so you knew they were still looking for one who could hit a little bit more. And that guy was Eloy Jimenez. That's right. Eloy Jimenez is a Baltimore Oriole. The 27-year-old, well, actually, he'll be later this year, he'll be 28, but 27-year-old right-handed hitting kind of DH/outfielder from the Chicago White Sox. The Orioles sent left-handed pitching prospect out of AAA Trey Mago over to Chicago, also agreed to pay the rest of his contract this year. It's only about $7 million in the deal. Now, Jimenez, first of all, if he hits well, and that's a big if right now with how his season's been going, but if he hits well, the Orioles can bring him back for a couple more years. Now, he signed a pretty team-friendly extension back in starting in the 2019 season. It ran through this year, but it also has 2 years of team options. So he has a $16.5 million team option for 2025 and an $18.5 million team option for 2026. So if he plays well, the O's can bring him back for at least 1 year and maybe even 2 more, but he'd have to play fairly well for the O's to commit $16 to $18 million to Eloy Jimenez. Otherwise, he is not the Eloy Jimenez we maybe remember from the past. He is not the Eloy Jimenez who came up in 2019 at age 22 with the White Sox and hit 31 home runs in 122 games. He's not the Eloy Jimenez who had a 138 WRC plus in the shortened 2020 season, or the 2022 Eloy Jimenez, who hit 295, slugged 500, and had a 143 WRC plus that season. Not exactly the same player. Not even the guy who was a little bit above league average last year at the plate. He's the guy now who has certainly had some injuries and is just not having a good offensive season with the White Sox. He's played in only 65 games this year because he's had 2 different stints on the injured list. He had an adductor strain in April. He had a hamstring strain in May. And when he's been out there, really since then, it hasn't been great. 249 plate appearances this year for the White Sox. Eloy Jimenez has just an 80 WRC plus. He's hitting just 240 with a 297 on base and a 345 slugging, just 5 home runs. Now, a 7% walk rate is a little higher than we're used to from Jimenez, and an 18.9% strikeout rate is actually the lowest K rate of his career. So that's a good sign. He's chasing less, he's swinging and missing less, but he's hitting for far less power. Again, that slugging percentage, very much a career low at 345, almost 100 points lower than his second lowest, a 105 isolated power. He's just not driving the baseball in the air. So you're asking, okay, how does he go from at least at worst a slightly above league average hitter to a guy who's 20% worse than league average with the bat, despite the fact that when you look at his baseball savant page, like things look pretty good. Average exit velocity of 92.4 miles an hour. That's considered fairly elite. That is the best average EV of his entire career, including those amazing seasons he had, including the year when he ended up hitting 31 home runs. So that's pretty good. You also have a hard hit rate of 50.8%. That is the second highest of Jimenez's career. So you put that together and you're like, how did he end up with an 80 WRC plus? Well, Jimenez has always been a guy who hits the ball on the ground too much. Yeah, he hits the ball hard, but hits it into the ground. He had run like 50% ground ball rates, not really what you want to do as a hitter, but he hit it so hard that they would still be base hits and he still hit enough balls in the air for home runs. This year, Jimenez has taken it to a different level, a 2.7 degree launch angle. That's pretty bad. That's a lot of grounders. A 60% ground ball rate is really, really bad. It is the third highest among players with at least 200 plate appearances this year. The only 2 guys with higher ground ball rates this season, Harold Ramirez was DFA'd from the Rays because he was bad, and Tim Anderson basically was, before he was DFA'd, the worst hitter in Major League Baseball this year. So that's not great. So the Orioles have to find a way for him to hit the ball a little bit more in the air. And again, he's been good at 50%. It just can't be 60%. That's just like unplayable offensively to have a ground ball rate that bad. But he's hit lefties. He's hitting 304 against left-handed pitching this year. Can't really play the outfield anymore. Wasn't great out there last year. Only played 8 innings in the outfield this year, some due to injuries, some just because he's not great out there. But what's he going to be for the Orioles? Well, kind of a DH, maybe a little first base, maybe a little outfield, but mostly DH option against left-handed pitching. And the Orioles had said they were looking for another right-handed bat. They were kind of short one. Now, you could argue, isn't that Kobe Mayo's spot on the roster? And maybe it will be, but maybe eventually Mayo just takes Arias' spot, and you also have Jimenez as another right-handed hitter. It is certainly a possibility, but I do think not only can he just hit the ball in the air a little bit more, and because he hits the ball so hard and doesn't strike out a lot, he can be a lot better. I think he's going to be a lot better as a hitter. The other thing is, he came from a terrible situation in Chicago. Things can only get better if he starts playing for a good team. And the O's basically gave up close to nothing. Trey Mago is their 37th ranked prospect in the system via Fangraphs. He was a left-handed pitcher who was taken in the 2022 minor league phase of the Rule 5 draft from Pittsburgh. He was recovering from Tommy John surgery, come back this year. 35 innings, does have a 2.08 ERA, but not a lot of strikeouts, a little bit of a walks issue. Fastball, slider, changeup guy, kind of projects, according to Fangraphs, as a reliever, but someone who wasn't really going to factor in to the Orioles bullpen here in 2024. So they don't give up much, and they get Eloy Jimenez, who could be a factor for this lineup down the stretch, like the move is kind of addition on the margins. But then they made another kind of weird move on the margins, and that was the Orioles acquired outfielder Austin Slater and infielder Livan Soto from the Cincinnati Reds for either cash or a player to be named later. That full return will be to be named later. Now, kind of a weird move because, okay, Austin Slater makes sense if you don't have Eloy Jimenez. Slater can play the outfield. He's actually been fairly okay defensively out there. Has played all 3 outfield positions, at least 50 innings between his time with the Giants and the Reds this year, and has even played some center field, which is what the Orioles really need, a right-handed hitting center fielder on this roster. And he has a career 122 WRC plus against left-handed pitching, always been a lefty masher, has good hard hit rates the last couple of seasons. So as a guy who in a vacuum would have made sense, but the Orioles had just 10 minutes prior picked up Eloy Jimenez and filled that role. So then you have Austin Slater, and that kind of doesn't make any sense. Now, with the Giants this year, he had kind of fallen off offensively. 78 WRC plus and 112 plate appearances, was DFA'd, sent to the Reds. He had 21 plate appearances with the Reds. He had only 2 hits. They were both singles. The Reds basically got rid of him as well. And you can essentially look at this as like a waiver claim pickup. That is the same thing with Livan Soto, an infielder who has spent a little bit of time in the big leagues over the past 3 years, but mostly in AAA. Soto was actually with the Orioles organization and in spring training with the O's at one point this year, then was DFA'd. They brought him back. Soto has options, so he has immediately been optioned to AAA Norfolk. He'll be like infield and shortstop depth for the O's at AAA, and you hope they don't need him at MLB, but just another infielder to have down there as they traded away some prospects. For Slater, I don't know, because Slater is a rental. He's a free agent after this year, but he's out of options. You can't just send him to AAA. So he's now on the 40-man roster, but it doesn't really make sense to have him and Jimenez. So I don't really know what they're going to do with Slater. He's like the one guy from this group where I'm just like, I got no idea. They might just DFA him immediately again, try to pass him through waivers and keep him in the organization. That's one thing they could do. I don't really know about that one, but maybe the O's got him before they got Jimenez and it was just reported in the wrong direction and they didn't think they could get Jimenez and then they got him. That's one thing that maybe could have happened. And then they'll just DFA Slater. That's kind of my prediction, but yeah, a little bit of a weird move. They did have to clear 40-man space for both of these guys. So Matt Crook, the left-handed reliever, was DFA. Did make one appearance with the Orioles. Nasty stuff from the left side, but too many walks, kind of never put it together. And then Jorge Mateo was moved to the 60-day injured list, so he does not count currently towards the 40-man roster. That certainly is not good for his outlook with that elbow injury. That means he's going to be out for a more extended amount of time, and I wouldn't put it past him that Mateo might be done for the year with that gruesome-looking injury, but that did clear up space on the 40-man for the Orioles. And then that last really big-time big league move that the Orioles made was they got more bullpen help, and they went right back to the Phillies. So the O's acquired 2 starters this year. Both came from rebuilding teams, or at least teams that were sellers at the deadline, the Rays and the Marlins. And then they got 2 relievers. And those 2 relievers came from the team that is arguably the best team in Major League Baseball, the Philadelphia Phillies, who are trying to win a World Series. They got Anthony Dominguez from them. And now they get Gregory Soto. Left-handed pitcher Gregory Soto comes to the Orioles in exchange for 2 right-handed pitching prospects, Seth Johnson and Moises Chase. Now, who is Gregory Soto, first of all? He is a 29-year-old left-handed pitcher who has been in the big league since 2019 with the Tigers and was an all-star out of the Tigers bullpen in 2021 and 22 as their closer, then was dealt to the Phillies that offseason, has been in Philly for 2 years. He was okay last year, threw in 69 games, had a 4.62 ERA. Underlying stats were much better, but he kind of faded down the stretch, and the Phillies barely used him in the postseason last year, was not kind of in the bullpen circle of trust, but he had a roster spot again this year, 43 games, 35 and a third innings for the Phillies this year, 4.08 ERA with a 3.61 FIP. Now, his 27% strikeout rate has actually gone up, some of the best one since his all-star days with Detroit, but also has a 12% walk rate, which is still the second lowest of his career, but is much higher than he had last year. The strikeouts and walks look more like they did when he was an all-star in Detroit, and so do the ground ball rates. 50% ground ball rate. That is really, really good from Gregory Soto, and that's because he is a big-time sinker guy. It's 41% sinkers. He throws it 97 to 98, but that sinker's been hit this year, 314 batting average against it. Still gets some ground balls, but there are a lot of hard hit ground balls. He's got a really good slider, though. Throws it 39% of the time, has a 48% swing and miss rate, and opponents are hitting just 194 against that slider from Gregory Soto. It's been an elite pitch this season. And, the overall ERA doesn't look great for Soto, but he's had some bad luck this year and last year. And, he throws really hard from the left side. Lefties have hit just 204 against him. He's been super tough on left-handed hitters this season. And honestly, he just had a really bad April. He's had a 3.04 ERA since May 1st. He's has a 2.84 ERA since June 1st. And the change he made in that time, he kind of went to the slider as his number one pitch. He threw a little bit less fastballs and went to more sliders. And that pitch has just been so good that he's turned himself into somewhat close to the elite reliever he was at multiple times in Detroit when he was an all-star. And that is a good sign for the Orioles as they bring him in. What will his role be in Baltimore? He's kind of a similar pitcher to Cionel Perez, but he's certainly a lefty upgrade if he pitches well over Keegan Aiken, and that makes the bullpen better. And hopefully the O's do get Danny Coulombe back at some point in September to be another good lefty, but he's also a just in case they don't get Coulombe back. He could be a high leverage lefty if he starts to pitch well. I do like the move, and hey, he also has team control, just like Dominguez, who's controlled through next year. Soto is also not a free agent until after 2025, so you can get him back into this bullpen to help the Orioles next season as well. Now, who do they send away? 2 pitching prospects. The first is Seth Johnson, who came over to the O's in the Trey Mancini trade from the Astros in 2022, was a highly coveted, or excuse me, not from the Astros, from the Rays in 2022, was a highly coveted prospect back then, but the only reason the O's were able to get him for Mancini, he needed Tommy John surgery, and the O's knew that. They got him. They immediately put him under the knife, and he really didn't fully return until this season when he came to Double-A, and it'd been good, 65 innings, 2.63 ERA, much higher FIP, 23% strikeout rate, 13% walk rate, not great. He has been on the 40-man roster since November of 22 because he was Rule 5 eligible, but I don't think he's progressed as much as the O's have wanted this year. I think they would have wanted him to be at least in AAA at this point and kind of knocking on the door for a big league bullpen spot. That has not been the case, and it's hard to hold a guy on the 40-man roster who's in Double-A and not close to helping your big league team. So that's one of the reasons why I think they were looking to potentially deal him. Fangraphs has Johnson as the number 16th ranked prospect in the Orioles system. It's a good fastball, mid-90s, curveball, changeup, cutter. Projects as a reliever. You know, it hurts to lose him. The O's had some eggs in that basket when they traded for him in the Mancini deal, but they did get Chase McDermott as well, and he seems to be a piece of the future. So they move on from Johnson, and they also move on from Moises Chase, who has really popped this year in Aberdeen for the Orioles. Number 24 Orioles prospect at Fangraphs. Mid-90s fastball with great ride, slider, and changeup. 52 innings, 3.46 ERA, 34% strikeout rate with a 14% walk rate in Aberdeen this year. He's been great. That one might hurt even more than Johnson, but you got to give up some pitching to get some pitching, and the Orioles do that to get Gregory Soto.
No football, no NBA, no problem with FanDuel. We got baseball. WNBA is going to be back before you know it. The Olympics are here. Plenty to dive into over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. The MVP award in the American League may already be decided, and there's still 2 more months to play. FanDuel is giving you Aaron Judge or the field. The odds for Aaron Judge to win the AL MVP, minus 1,000. That's a lot. 10-1. The odds are anyone else at plus 660. All rise. So what are you waiting for? Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. If you're catching this episode after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode.
The trade deadline has come and passed.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The trade deadline has officially concluded. It was a very busy and active day. Lots of trades went down, and the Royals were one of those teams that did not wait around in getting some deals done. This is what today's entire episode is going to be dedicated to, who those players were, what they gave up, and what their role is going to be for the 2024 Kansas City Royals, and what the role could be next year, the year after that, for at least one player that Kansas City acquired. So let's kick things off with how today transpired. What I think was the feeling, the gut feeling that I had going into today was that the Royals were going to acquire at minimum one person, but I had a hunch that it was going to be 2, just from what had been said, what had been heard over the last handful of weeks. The Royals were going to use today as their go-all-in day, and not for the season, but to make these trades happen. They were going to find a way to make sure those deals got done. And for probably, I would say, a month or 2, we had known that the Royals were going to be aggressive in getting another bullpen arm. We knew they were going to be aggressive in trying to find a bat, maybe not the bat that we thought would make the most sense. But as we had discussed yesterday on the episode, and I've now brought it up, this will be the third time I brought it up, but being at 810 WHB, you get the chance to meet and hang out with a lot of the hosts that you may listen to on a daily basis. And Stephen St. John over with his show of A New Day with SSJ had Buster Olney on. And you've heard me say this many a times now, that the league had felt like the Royals had targeted some guys and they were going to get those guys they targeted. And who they acquired in total, Hunter Harvey, Michael Lorenzen, Lucas Ursig, and Paul DeYoung, all were very affordable, right? The Royals were not shooting for the moon. We saw what Tanner Scott brought back for the Marlins, and that was quite a haul. And they had probably the best selling deadline that I had seen in a long time. They did what the White Sox should have been doing. But the White Sox didn't really get any talent at the trade deadline, and now they've hung on to guys that may or may not be great next year or may not be moved in the winter. Who really knows what Chris Getz is thinking over in Chicago? But at least the Royals and the White Sox were able to get one deal done to give Kansas City a little power, a little pop off the bench. But as the hours rolled on, I never really got this sense of panic or that they weren't going to do anything. I felt pretty confident the Royals were going to get a move done just because of who was still out there. I think Luis Rengifo made a lot of sense. I think Taylor Ward made a lot of sense for the Royals. But the Angels held on to both of them. And I think that is a misconception at time at the trade deadline. And I think I have been led on a few times with this. But if a player has club control, that does not mean that you have to trade him at the trade deadline. Just because they're a hot trade chip doesn't mean you have to do it now. They very well could wait till the winter, and maybe the Royals being interested in some of those guys, and Taylor Ward and Luis Rengifo, you can revisit that in the winter. If the Royals leadoff spot and the production doesn't improve, I think the Royals could always go back to the Angels in the offseason and say, hey, what's the price now on Luis Rengifo? What's the price now on Taylor Ward? Because Taylor Ward would be going into a contract year. The price probably comes down a little bit because you're not just paying for a year and a half of Taylor Ward. You're paying for just 1 year at that point in time. But again, all of that is speculation, and that's for months down the road. What the Royals got in their first deal, being Lucas Ursig, I thought was a home run deal for them. Lucas Ursig was somebody, because of the years of control, which was 5 in total, the Royals could have him for a very long time. I thought they were going to have to give up one of their untouchable guys. And JJ Picollo had been very vocal about telling teams these guys are off the table, but who else do you like? And they get that deal done with Oakland and just giving up Mason Barnett and giving up Will Klein, who was in Kansas City last night, and Jared Dickey, who was taken in last year's draft class. I thought the return was more than fair. In fact, I would put it in favor of Kansas City because of what Lucas Ursig does to their bullpen. And we'll talk about this more so in the second segment, but also what he means moving forward for this team, how you can go into the offseason and try to assemble your bullpen. I think Lucas Ursig becomes the Royals closer. But again, that's going to be talked about here in about 4 to 5 minutes. That deal happened, and I thought the Royals were going to have to give up a haul just because of the years of control there. I mean, we saw what A.J. Puck was worth when Arizona traded for him, and Miami got a lot of prospects in return, and some big-time prospects at that. A.J. Puck is younger than Lucas Ursig, but still a reliever with multiple years of control seemed to be a pretty hefty price at the deadline. But that did not force J.J. Picollo into an uncomfortable position. I think that he felt pretty confident a deal like that could get done. He had mentioned that they had been working on the deal for the last couple weeks, and they gave up 3 prospects, and yes, one of them inside their top 5, but we've said this before on the show, and I'm going to reiterate it. The Royals' top 5s are not top 5s in other organizations. And I got asked this on YouTube the other day. What do I mean by saying, bottom 5 system? How do the Royals have a bottom system if they've been losing so much of late? Well, missed draft picks. Simple as that. Not hitting on first rounders, guys that haven't developed properly, guys that have taken more time. They should have had a higher ranking farm system at this point, but they didn't draft that well from 2018, 2019, 2020, and so on and so forth. More so, I think, from not drafting well when the Royals were competing for American League pennants. That was a true crusher when it gets down to it. They still hit on Bobby Wood Jr. in 19. They like Blake Mitchell a lot. They like Gavin Cross now. Yes, they missed on Asa Lacy, but a lot of people missed on their prospects back in 2020. But who they gave up, I mean, I liked the prospects. I liked Mason Barnett. Was I overly confident he was going to be a frontline starting pitcher? No. I thought it would be kind of a stretch that he would crack a top 3 in the rotation, could get some starts as a number 4 or number 5. I liked Will Klein a lot, but he's also a reliever, and you got a much better reliever in return, and a guy that can close out games. Jared Dickey was so early into his big league career, I don't think you really know what he could become. He wasn't ranked inside the top 30. So all things considered, I think a very good deal for Kansas City, and they solve a glaring issue in the back end of their bullpen, and now they add their hardest thrower into the bullpen as Ursig sits about 98.5 with his fastball. Paul DeJong is a little bit more of an interesting pickup. It didn't cost the Royals barely anything. It was a lottery ticket throw-in. What I mean by that with a lottery ticket guy, you're talking about the 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds in your very lower part of the farm system that have barely had a chance to pitch professionally. Now, Rosado, the kid they'd sent over for Paul DeJong, was pitching well in low A Columbia, but he also was a little bit older for that level. I think he had just turned 22. That's usually a level for guys that are anywhere from 19 to 20 to 21. So he had pitched the majority of the year as a 21-year-old, but still on the older end of what that level of ball represents. Paul DeJong, though, is not a superstar. He has not been particularly great for Chicago, but because of what the Royals gave up for Lucas Ursig, I think that this was the next best affordable option. Somebody they were looking at. Paul DeJong has 18 home runs this year, so there is significant pop there. He, I think, jumps into 3rd for home runs among Royals now. So he's right behind Salvador Perez and right behind Bobby Wood Jr. He has some pop in his bat. He's not the best defender. He doesn't walk much. Again, the overall numbers aren't going to seriously impress you, but they wanted a right-handed bat. J.J. Bacol was vocal about it. They gave up 3 prospects to bring in their closer, and then they add an extra bat, and they option Nick Lofton in doing so. I believe Paul DeJong is a better offensive threat than Garrett Hampson and Nick Lofton. So you do get a little better in that department.
No football, no NBA, no problem with FanDuel. We got baseball. WNBA is going to be back before you know it. The Olympics are here. Plenty to dive into over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. The MVP award in the American League may already be decided, and there's still 2 more months to play. FanDuel is giving you Aaron Judge or the field. The odds for Aaron Judge to win the AL MVP, -1,000. That's a lot. 10-1. The odds are anyone else at +660. All rise. So what are you waiting for? Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. If you're catching this episode after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode.
We're talking about the ACC possibly stealing teams from the Big 12.
You are Locked On ACC, your daily podcast on the Atlantic Coast Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
There's a new, I don't know if I call this a rumor or more of a theory as to why and how ESPN would actually steer teams from the expansion Big 12 over to the ACC. So let's break down some of the nitty-gritty on this. And by the way, I share the annoyance that Drake had with this, that why are we allowing people on the X app to write novels? Like this is not a tweet. This is a full-on blog that this person wrote. Why ESPN will move Big 12 schools to the ACC. He says ESPN wants more profit and less cost. Then how could it make more money with respect to the ACC than the Big 12? Contrary to what many people think, the simplest solution would be to move some of the Big 12 schools to the ACC. Why is that? He says the answer, by the way, this is from ex-user Old Gray Dog, which in itself makes me laugh. He says the ACC is expected to make more money than the Big 12 for the Big 12's next cycle by 5 to 10 million per year. But note that the ACC has two separate deals with ESPN, the base contract and the ACC network contract. The base contract with ESPN gives the ACC only the low 20s in 2023. Each ACC school received another 11 million from the ACC network profit sharing. In other words, ESPN gives less money to the ACC than to the Big 12 if we only look at the base contract. The ACC money is subscription-based and is shared between ESPN and the ACC. Thus, more people subscribe to the ACC network, the more profit ESPN and the ACC would share. On top of that, cable companies are also required to pay higher in-network carriage fees for states where the ACC schools are located. Thus, if ESPN moves the Big 12 schools to the ACC, ESPN would pay less base contract pay and receive more ACC network profit. He talks about Utah and Arizona State as teams that come to mind. First of all, Kenton, I know this guy has numbers to back up his claims. The whole thing seems a little absurd on the surface, plus the fact a lot of people out there assume that ESPN and Fox just have the Power Four conferences on puppet strings. I feel like that gets overstated a lot.
Yeah, they're imagining Disney to be a combination of Vought International, of Global Corp, of Global. They're imagining that they're this mystery conglomerate. What was the company in Fallout? Do you remember the company in Fallout that was pulling the strings?
What is that? A video game? I have no idea what you're talking about.
Never mind. You're a little too old. Yo, Vault Tech. That was the name. Vault Tech was the name of the company.
Okay.
They're imagining that there are all of these companies at once, and they simply are not. Don't get me wrong. Disney is massively powerful. They do have a ton of money. That is not to be understated in all of this. But I think that we're creating a situation where we are imagining Disney as being so powerful, they can move institutions from one conference to the other with a snap of their fingers, which is not necessarily the case. It's not the way it sits right now. And this is why I think it's so interesting that now people are finally looking at sources and saying, wait a minute, is this source legitimate? Because where were these same people vetting at when there were all of these rampant rumors about the ACC breaking apart and all these teams leaving left and right and all that? Nobody was vetting sources then. When there were rumors that, oh yeah, Florida State and Clemson played their last game in the ACC, not a single damn soul did an ounce of vetting. Now all of a sudden we're paying attention. But you know what? If this is the moment that gets us to pay attention to where we're getting our information from, good. Because I don't believe that the ACC is taking Big 12 teams. Really, with Utah and Arizona State, they are Pac-12 to Big 12, but you get my point.
Yeah.
I don't think that they're going to take those teams because Utah just signed into that contract. Utah cannot, hey, I don't like this contract, I'm leaving. As we're seeing right now with Florida State and Clemson, you cannot do that with a contract that just because you don't like it. You have signed that contract. You have to sit in that for a while. You have to do whatever you got to do, pay whatever the exit fee is. But that's just the reality of what we're looking at here. And moreover than anything else, yes, the numbers make sense, but there are things outside of numbers sometimes. When you break down the raw numbers of who makes more, and this would be a very simple, it's like saying, oh yeah, Dono, you save a ton of money if you just didn't take care of your kid anymore. Well, hypothetically, yes. Yeah, yes.
If I don't feed him, if I just send him out to panhandle for food, that I can.
Yeah. Listen, all you got to do is go behind the cookout, and they throwing out food every night at about 3:50 a.m. You know, just send them out there. They'll feel bad for them. Tell them to do the big eyes. They'll get free food for everybody. But you get the point. There are practical things that do not always align with theory, and this is one of those moments.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like ESPN obviously has a lot of leverage when it comes to the ACC and the Big 12 being the biggest and most important TV partner, but people just assume the conferences have no autonomy whatsoever, that like, you know, they have their own contracts and agreements and relationships with their members. Now, I guess like if you really want to dig deep into the conspiracy, you know, ESPN can always threaten, hey, we have that look-in provision coming up. if you got, which is actually with the ACC, so that's leverage more. I think the ESPN has more leverage over the ACC than they do with the Big 12. But I guess you could say we're not going to renew this deal, or we're not going to extend it if you don't do what we say. So obviously, there's a certain amount of leverage and power that the TV networks have, but people assume that the conferences have no autonomy whatsoever. Like I got to tell you, if it was all about the TV networks, then Fox would have already snatched up Clemson and FSU. It may happen eventually when they get to the Big Ten, but it certainly hasn't happened yet. But I think my message here is, Kenton, that people have to do a better job, maybe us included, in filtering out the noise from the actual reputable conference realignment reports. Let's try to filter out the reports a little bit better from the rumors, because, and I enjoyed this theory. I enjoy the theory that, yeah, cost-effective ESPN could probably do themselves a financial favor if they were to turn these two conferences upside down. I just don't know if they actually have the literal power to do so. Now I do. Go ahead.
Oh, no. I was just going to say the only thing that I agree with out of this article is the ACC stands to make more than, or to give ESPN more than the Big 12 for getting a lesser payout. So that's why I keep trying to tell everybody, this world that you're imagining where ESPN doesn't renew the ACC's contract, it's delusion. It's delusion. Come back to planet Earth, because that is the one thing that this tweet got right that I've been saying for forever. The ACC gives ESPN a great deal. They're not going to lose themselves out of a great deal to where now Fox can go get that great deal because, well, we just don't think you guys are worth it without Clemson and Florida State. That's not how this thing works.
No football, no NBA, no problem with FanDuel. We got baseball. WNBA is going to be back before you know it. The Olympics are here. Plenty to dive into over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a booster bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. The MVP award in the American League may already be decided, and there's still 2 more months to play. FanDuel is giving you Aaron Judge or the field. The odds for Aaron Judge to win the AL MVP, -1,000. That's a lot. 10-1. The odds are anyone else at +660. All rise. So what are you waiting for? Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. If you're catching this episode after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Joining me now from The Athletic, new podcast host, Diana Orsini. The Scoop is the podcast. I've been listening, Diana. I'm really having a lot of fun with it. It seems like you guys are having a lot of fun with it. But before we get into the fun Jordan Love stuff, what made you want to slum it with podcast hosts like me?
Slum it? No way. This is the best. Look, the joke is that everyone has a podcast, right? So I actually approached it worried that this was going to be hard to get some traction because there's so many great podcasts out there. But my thought is I come from the TV world, and if you see most sets, they're the same. It's like the analyst, that's usually a former player, and the reporter / insider. And there's no podcast right now in the football space that is set up the same way. So I thought, why don't we do this? So Chase Daniel, my co-host, 14-year veteran quarterback, is the analyst and fantastic and opinionated and not afraid. I can tell you that. And with my information, we mix it together and just have a conversation. And that's really been probably the best part of this experience has been, this is the most authentic version, I think, of both Chase and I, because our podcast sounds a lot like our FaceTimes. Like it's the same thing. We don't really hold back, which is also dangerous, right? Because you feel like you're in this safe space. It's just a podcast, but guess what? A lot of people are listening. So I do forget that. So make sure you go check out Scoop City, and maybe you'll catch a couple unhinged takes or pieces of information that I'm not tweeting about. Because that's another thing too. I don't tweet everything I know, but I've been talking about everything I know. So that's probably why it's a good idea. If you want some intel, come check us out.
It's a great contrast because Chase is so deep in the football side
and then you'll just like drop a little nugget on him, and he'll go, "Wait, what?" Like, and so
he
like
freaks
there's
out.
yeah,
He is like, wait, why? Why? And he gets so mad because obviously my job is to just be the messenger and give him the info, but he wants every layer as to how we got here. And it's hard to get that kind of intel.
Yeah.
But his natural curiosity is without a doubt the reason we're having success.
yeah, it's a very fun dynamic. I hope people go check it out. Let's talk about another quarterback who Packers fans hopes spends 14 years, not just in the NFL, but hopefully in Green Bay. Took a little, I would say a little step in that direction, Diana, on Friday when he signs that 4-year, $220 million extension. You and I were talking offline about the progress that was or wasn't being made. And so it seemed like it was something we're waiting. And all of a sudden it's just done. Obviously behind the scenes, that's not what happened. What can you tell us about how this all came together?
Yeah. So let's just go back 2 years ago. I'll start there. We're not going to go through every day, but just in terms of that'd
All right.
be insane.
Jordan Love, drafted.
Although there
2020,
are
let's go.
correct. Although I do think there are Packer fans that care enough and would like
could do it.
they would like the daily routine of Jordan Love and his agents and the front office of Green Bay to find out how this all truly came together. But you look at we'll call it the setup, the situation, the contract that they gave him. And I remember talking to people around the league outside of Green Bay about, well, what do you make of this contract that Green Bay is giving Jordan and Jordan agreeing to this? And there were people who felt that it reeked of insecurity from both sides.
Yeah.
Jordan obviously doesn't, want some security. Green Bay's still not sure. And then of course he goes out this last year, at least towards the second half of the season, has an MVP caliber type performance out there, right? And everyone is smiling behind the scenes like, okay, we did it again. So fast forward now to the last few weeks, and look, I always want to preface this because it's just explained to me this way, and I'm just going to repeat what I'm told by people that do these deals, which is this stuff takes a long time.
Mm-hmm.
They do not operate the way we all do in terms of how fast we all are on our phones with text messages and just getting our stuff done. It's almost like they're still in the 80s. The way they send these contract offers back and forth, and the red pens, and who's reading what and what language and articles of the wording. It's apparently it's a heavier lift than you'd expect, and it just takes a lot of eyes and people on it. So that's my excuse for why it came, late July here. That's what I'm going to share as the excuse. But I know in terms of in the trenches, this was all about the structure. This wasn't about APY. They knew they wanted to make him, the highest paid quarterback in the NFL, and they were able to come up with an agreement where I know both sides really feel like they won. In fact, on the outside, I would argue Green Bay won this slightly more based on how this contract, at least the details of it all, have all come together.